arrested without knowing the truth. Police shocked after realizing who the black man was. It was a warm Thursday afternoon in Oak Ridge, a quiet town nestled just outside Atlanta. People were going about their business, shopping, walking dogs, sipping coffee, when a call came into the local police department. "A black man is standing outside the Langford jewelry store. He's just been standing there for a while. Looks suspicious," said the voice on the phone. That was all it took. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars rolled up. Officers approached the man, who was calmly leaning against a black Cadillac Escalade, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and polished shoes. He held a leather portfolio under one arm and was looking at his phone. "Sir, we need to see some ID," one of the officers said sharply. The man looked up, mildly surprised but not flustered. "Is there a problem, officer? We got a report of suspicious activity. You fit the description. I'm just waiting for my driver. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, he replied. Despite his calm demeanor and well-groomed appearance, the officers weren't satisfied. One of them moved in and began patting him down. "Hands behind your back!" "What, officer? This is a misunderstanding." Before he could finish, the man was in handcuffs, his belongings confiscated and placed in the back of the patrol car. He said nothing else. At the station, the officers began processing him, still unaware of who they were dealing with. That was, until the captain walked in, glanced at the man's face, and turned white. "Get those cuffs off him, now!" The room went silent. The man stood calmly and dusted off his sleeves. "Captain Reynolds," he said, nodding. "Judge Harmon," the captain said with a strained voice. "I had no idea." Judge Elijah Harmon was not just any man. He was a decorated federal judge, Harvard Law graduate, and former U.S. Army officer. He had successfully argued cases before the Supreme Court, fought for prison reform, and once helped expose a network of judicial corruption in the South. And yet, despite everything, here he was, arrested outside a store in his own country because of the color of his skin. The officers stood frozen. "You arrested me because I was black in a white neighborhood," Judge Harmon said. "You didn't ask who I was, you assumed." He refused to press charges, but his words struck deep. "Do you see now why people don't trust the system?" he said, looking each officer in the eye. "Because the system often doesn't see them as people at all." The story broke within hours. News outlets picked it up. Headlines flashed. "Federal judge wrongfully arrested in racial profiling incident. Even judges aren't safe from discrimination." Social media exploded. Protests formed. The mayor issued a public apology. The police department was forced to implement sweeping reforms, starting with mandatory anti-bias training, community transparency forums, and the firing of one of the arresting officers. Judge Harmon never spoke of the incident again. But at his next public appearance, when asked what justice looked like, he said, "Justice is when I can stand in front of a store without being feared. Justice is when my skin isn't a weapon in someone else's eyes. Justice is knowing my grandson won't have to go through what I did today." Ripple effect. The video of Judge Elijah Harmon's arrest made national headlines. Civil rights leaders, politicians, and everyday citizens shared it across platforms. For many, it wasn't just another case of racial profiling. It was a glaring reminder that status and success don't protect black men from injustice. That weekend, Judge Harmon received a visit, not from the mayor or the police chief, but from a young man named Marcus Fields. Marcus, 22, had been arrested by the same officers 6 months earlier for resisting arrest after questioning why he was being stopped. The charges had been dropped, but the damage lingered. He'd lost his job and dropped out of community college. "I saw what they did to you," Marcus said, "and if they could do that to a federal judge, I thought maybe people would finally believe what I've been through." The judge listened quietly. "Come back tomorrow," Harmon said. "Let's talk about your future." Over the next few months, Judge Harmon turned his experience into purpose. He launched an initiative called Equal Eyes, a program that provided legal aid, community education, and police accountability monitoring across several southern states. He partnered with law schools, civil rights organizations, and even former officers who had turned whistleblowers. Meanwhile, the Oak Ridge Police Department underwent major changes. Body cameras became mandatory. An independent civilian review board was established. Officer Darren Mills, the one who had first handcuffed Harmon, resigned under public pressure, but later reached out privately. "I was wrong," Mills said in an email, "and I'm trying to understand why I reacted the way I did." Harmon didn't respond immediately. But a week later, he sent back one line: "Real justice begins when truth meets humility." The town of Oakridge slowly changed. Judge Harmon's experience forced people to look at themselves, at their fears, assumptions, and biases. Conversations began in schools, churches, even coffee shops, and Marcus, he re-enrolled in college with a scholarship funded by Equal Eyes. He later became a civil rights attorney. Would you like me to continue with part 3? Turning point. 2 years had passed since Judge Elijah Harmon was wrongfully arrested in Oakridge. In that time, Equal Eyes had expanded beyond the South, opening chapters in Chicago, Baltimore, and Los Angeles. Hundreds of young people like Marcus Fields had been mentored, defended, and inspired by the movement. Judge Harmon, once a quiet force in the courtroom, had become a national voice, calm, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. But with greater impact came greater resistance. In a televised debate on criminal justice reform, a state senator openly challenged Harmon. "With all due respect, Judge, if you hadn't been a federal judge, no one would have cared about your story." "You're absolutely right," Harmon replied, to everyone's surprise. "And that's the problem." The room fell silent. "That's why I'm here. Not for me. For the ones without cameras, without a platform, without a title. Because justice should not depend on status. It should depend on truth." The clip went viral. Later that year, Judge Harmon was invited to speak at a congressional hearing on policing reform. He brought Marcus Fields with him. "I was once told I looked suspicious," Marcus said before Congress, "but today I stand here not as a suspect, but as a future lawyer, because someone saw past my skin and into my potential." A round of applause followed. That fall, Judge Harmon announced his retirement from the bench. Instead of rest, he declared a new mission, opening the Harmon Center for Justice and Civic Reform, dedicated to training the next generation of civil rights leaders. And Oakridge, the town that once ignored its blind spots, became a model of reform, hosting national summits and earning praise for its transformation. Final lines. On the anniversary of his arrest, Judge Harmon stood quietly in front of the same jewelry store. No cameras, no press, just him and Marcus and a few others who had walked that same hard path. He looked up at the street sign, recently renamed Justice Way, and smiled. "Still standing," he said. "Always," Marcus replied. "Would you lotion?" Months after the opening of the Harmon Center for Justice and Civic Reform, applications were flooding in from across the country. Students, activists, former inmates, and even ex-police officers applied, not just to learn the law, but to learn how to change it. Judge Elijah Harmon, though officially retired, remained deeply involved. He held monthly justice circles where real people shared real stories, wrongful arrests, family losses, redemption, and hope. These circles weren't just about healing, they were about action. One day, an unexpected letter arrived, subject, "Request to join." The officer who had once handcuffed Judge Harmon in front of the boutique now sought to become a mentor in the reform program. Harmon called a private meeting. "Why?" he asked Mills. Mills didn't flinch. "Because if I had been trained the way you train these kids, I might have seen a man instead of a threat. I want to be part of making sure that never happens again." There was a long pause. Then Harmon nodded. "Redemption isn't a gift. It's a responsibility. You'll start in outreach." And so a former cop and the judge he once wronged stood together in front of a group of young men and women, teaching empathy, awareness, and courage. That winter, Marcus Fields passed the bar. On the day of his swearing-in, he wore the same blue suit Judge Harmon wore the day he was arrested. In his speech, Marcus said, "I was nearly crushed by the system, but I was rescued by a man it tried to crush too. Today I enter the system, not to be part of it, but to reform it from within. That's Judge Harmon's legacy, and now it's ours." The room erupted into applause. As Marcus and Harmon embraced, the cameras captured a moment that would appear in newspapers and history books across the nation. A symbol of justice not denied, but reborn. Final scene. Years later, a statue of Judge Elijah Harmon was unveiled in front of the Harmon Center. At its base were 5 words etched in granite: "Still standing, still changing lives." And beside the statue stood Marcus, now a judge himself. As children played nearby and families watched with pride, one thing was clear. This was no longer just a story of injustice, it was a story of transformation. Would you like an epilogue set 10 or 20 years in the future to show the generational impact, or should I help adapt this into a pitch for film or series development?